Man, I'm glad to be here with you guys tonight, and I'm excited. We're going to do things a little differently. We are going to have worship, but we're going to do that in the latter part of our time in here. And I kind of wanted to just, I guess, jump right in. We started a new series last week called Following Jesus In, and each week we want to look at a different circumstance that we go through in life that's common for all of us, and just sort of take the approach to see what do the scriptures say about this circumstance. So last week we looked at family, and tonight we're going to talk about conflict. What does it look like to follow Jesus in our conflicts? And so I did a little thought exercise to, I guess, humble myself in preparation of this, and I thought, what is the most angry I can ever remember being while I was in high school? And maybe there's something I can't think of, but what I recall is a particular instance when I was playing soccer. And I've shared with you guys before, if you've been around, that I was not always following Jesus when I was growing up. And I had a pretty, I guess radical, for lack of a better word, experience right before my junior year of high school, where I was not walking with Jesus, was not interested, and then right before my junior year of high school, I started trying to follow Jesus. So I have these memories of playing sports before Jesus and playing sports after Jesus. And I was a bit of a hothead. I had a big temper. I was yelling at teammates. I'd yell at coaches, certainly referees, and getting into stuff with other, opponents. And then my junior year of high school, I tried so hard to, honor God with how I played. And I would slip away with a teammate, and we would pray before every game behind the bleachers. And sometimes things went better than others. And one particular night, I don't even remember everything about it, but what I remember is we were playing this, I went to Centennial, and we were playing this small country school from another county. And this guy, you would get these guys who, you could tell they didn't know how to play soccer, but they probably, played football in the other season, and they were just, playing soccer because they didn't want to play baseball or something. And they're really awkward athletes. And this guy, this big kid basically, speared me, which, if you don't play soccer, there should never be an occasion where you're doing this to somebody. And, my memory is sort of foggy, but I felt like he was trying to hurt me. And so as we were falling down, just instinctually, I did something terrible to him. I'm not sure what. That, made him think I was trying to, break his back. And I know. I'm not saying I did or didn't do it, because I don't remember. I'm not trying to lie to you. I just, my emotion took over. This guy tried to tackle me, so I did something that made him really angry. And he used a bad word, and then he spit at me. And it is very disrespectful. I don't remember that much of it. I just remember being on the sideline screaming, I'm going to kill him. But with other words worked into the sentence over and over. And one of a graduated senior from a previous season who stayed around town to sort of help and work with us with the coaches. And I just remember, and this guy he was one of the few Christians around the team, this college-age guy. And he's cracking up at me. And he's trying to talk me down, putting his arm around my shoulder. He's like, Vairetta, it's okay, man, it's okay. And I'm like, no, I'm going to kill him. And I don't know that we ever resolved that conflict. So I'll just start tonight by saying sometimes conflict can go from 0 to 10 super fast. Most of you would not act the way I did in that moment. But man, we all have to deal with conflict almost every day. And so many times, if we don't address it well and quickly, it escalates really bad. I want to invite you to take a moment, and I don't do this a lot, but I actually want you to take a moment, think about this, and maybe answer this question of the person sitting on the other side of you. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being terrible, 10 being excellent, not you per se or your best friend, but high schoolers in general, how well do you think high schoolers in general handle conflict? 1 terrible, 10 excellent. Take a minute and talk with the people on either side of you. All right, just a few of you, raise your hand. I don't need a story. What do you think? Number? 3. Okay, what else? 2. Someone else? One. How many of you said one? Just raise a few of you, okay? Yeah. What do you think? 0? Okay, not even one. 4 or 5, okay? 4 or 5, okay. 3. All right, 5 is the high score. So, here, it's not exactly a scientific poll, but I think we can all agree no one's acing this, right? No one's acing this. No one's awesome at it. And I'll say, like, none of the adults I know are awesome at it either. Like, as a culture, as a society, we're not great at this. And that's too bad, because when you read through the Bible, one thing that's clear is that God cares about and desires unity among people. Psalm 133, verse 1 says, "How good and pleasant is it when God's people live together in unity." Some of you have maybe heard our pastor Darren talk before that there are multiple instances in Scripture where God's blessing and favor falls among his people after they first unite themselves. It seems as if there's this principle that God honors and blesses and recognizes unity when people fight for unity. So it's important, yet we all struggle with it. And one way I've thought about it a little bit is a lot of our conflict, it's like when you have like a cup in your car, maybe a cup from Starbucks, or like in my case, like my toddler's sippy cup with like just a little bit of milk in it. And it's not a big deal. Like if you take the cup in within a few hours, certainly, depending on the weather, even if you just get it in within a day or two, like whatever, you throw it out if it's a paper cup, or you wash it out if it's a reusable cup, but it's no drama if you address it relatively quickly. But if you don't address it for a while, and it rolls under the driver's seat, and you forget it's in there, and then it gets hot out, and then 3 weeks later, someone's riding in your car, and they're like, something died in here. And you're like, yeah, I thought it was your socks, and they were like, oh, I don't know, it's like a fart, but worse. And you get this whole thing, and then you realize what it is, and not only is the cup kind of ruined, you're going to have to throw it out, you got to now deal with the fact that your whole car stinks. And if you had just caught it early on, no drama. A lot of our conflict sort of builds this way. It really is often small and manageable, but when we leave it unattended, it gets big. And so we're going to look at a passage of Scripture tonight that is one of the most specific, one of the most practical, and if you'll take it seriously, can be one of the most helpful scriptures in all of the Bible. But before we turn to it, I got to start with this. There is a temptation when we talk about a subject like conflict for you to hear some of these words and immediately think, oh yeah, I know someone else who's bad at this. Or you're going to hear some of this and you're going to think, yeah, they did that wrong to me. Or yeah, they are terrible at it. And here's what I'm going to say up front. You're probably right. Most of you, maybe all of you, have fallen victim at times to someone else mishandling conflict, or to someone else not handling conflict well. I wouldn't deny that, and I wouldn't minimize your experience or your emotions. But what I will say is we can't control what other people do. We can only own our part of it. And I've never met anyone who's perfect at this. So I want to challenge you to be mature as we look at this and not dwell on someone who wronged you once, about how they handled conflict, but rather think about your own part and how you can be part of the solution. So we're going to look in Matthew chapter 18. This is a passage of Scripture where Jesus is speaking to some of his followers, and he's speaking very specifically about the topic of conflict between Christians. So I'm going to start in verse 15. It says, if another believer sins against you, go privately and point out the offense. If the other person listens and confesses it, you have won that person back. But if you are unsuccessful, take 1 or 2 others with you and go back again, so that everything you say may be confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses. If the person still refuses to listen, take your case to the church. Then if he or she won't accept the church's decision, treat that person as a pagan or corrupt tax collector. So we'll stop there. And what I want to do is just kind of pull out these main statements Jesus is making and consider, is that typical of us? Or what is the more typical way people tend to behave in these circumstances? And it's just something we can all consider. So first thing, he says, if another believer sins against you. And I want to stop on this for a moment. It's important we catch what he's saying. If someone else sins against you, not sins against some hypothetical person you don't know, and it doesn't say if someone else annoys you. We are talking specifically about if somebody wrongs you. So for a lot of us, our reaction is not to move if someone sins against us. We react if someone does something we don't like. And I want to challenge you guys as we consider conflict. No one owes it to you to always do things you like. And just because someone does something you don't like doesn't necessarily mean it's your place to confront them. It might mean that. I'm not saying it never does either. But it's just not that simple. Someone does something that you find annoying doesn't mean it's your right to go and make something of it. Now, if they're your friend and you're concerned for them and you don't like what they're doing, that's different. If they are someone who's given you permission to speak into their life because they know you care about them, there's plenty of occasions where we might have a hard conversation with a friend. But what I'm trying to help us understand is the rest of our life, people that we interact with, teammates, classmates, coworkers, family members, are going to do things that kind of like inside make us want to roll our eyes. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's your place to go and tell them they were wrong. It might be an opportunity for you to say, hey, I'd love to help you with this. Or it might be an opportunity for you to try and go and build up that friendship so that at some point in the future. But what we want to focus on with these next couple examples is when someone wrongs you. Go privately, point out the offense. Some of you might think I'm trying to pick on high school students. But the reality is, most adults I know are absolutely terrible at this. So you've got an opportunity to be more mature than a lot of the people that you might know. But a lot of us don't do it. Here's what I think is more typical, and I actually asked some people much younger than me to tell me if this is true, and they helped me write parts of this. Here's what's more typical. Go and text or snap someone else about and complain about it. Somebody wrongs you. For most of us, our first reaction is not to go to them and say, hey man, this could be an awkward conversation, but I got to let you know that when you did this, it kind of hurt my feelings. Most of us, our first reaction is, can you believe what they did? Can you believe him? He's the worst. She's the worst. Some passages in the Bible are hard to understand. I don't think this is one of them. Go privately. So let's just sit on this for a moment. If someone wrongs you, the goal is to show them how they hurt you in hopes of redeeming that friendship, of redeeming that relationship. So if you go in all charged up, thinking this is my opportunity to show them how stupid they are, you're already wrong. Helpful language around this can be using phrases like, even to just begin by saying, hey, this might be a difficult conversation, but I feel like the most honoring thing I can do is be honest with you. Use a phrase like, I know you probably didn't realize you did this, or I know you probably didn't mean to do this, but. And then don't assume their motives. Just say, when you did blank, and point to the objective fact, when you said this, when you did this, it made me feel this. That's a helpful, constructive way to do this. Going in, calling people names, raising your voice isn't going to get us far. You could read that and think, Matt, do you know how awkward that is? No one our age does that. My friends will think I'm super weird if I call them and say, hey, I need to talk to you about something that hurt me. I know it's awkward. I know. But what I want to suggest to you, pushing through the awkwardness in an effort to win back the friendship and to make peace is better than letting it foster, letting it simmer, letting it build, gossiping about them, telling people how much they're terrible. The awkwardness is worth it, I promise you. And I've been on both sides of this. I have had to initiate the awkward conversation, and I've certainly received it where people have said to me, Matt, it really bothered me when you did blank. And I don't know if there's been a single instance when me or that other person took this approach and we couldn't apologize and forgive and accept and make peace with one another. The conversation may be awkward. It really does work most of the time. Now, I know I kind of made this joke of like, don't text or snap them. I'm not kidding with what I'm about to say. It is never, ever, ever a good idea to manage your conflict through a screen. It is never a good idea. There's been plenty of research and science behind the idea that most of our communication comes through in body language and tone of voice. Words are actually a small percentage of it. And when you try to have a really difficult and important conversation that involves people's emotions through a screen that removes tone of voice and removes body language, you are not doing yourself or the other person any favors. Texting is a great way to tell someone your Chipotle order. Texting is a great way to let your mom know what time you're going to be home or when you need her to pick you up. Texting is a terrible way to have difficult and important and significant conversations. And I'm fully aware that most people your age, because it's actually true that most people my age do this over text and email in adult cases. And I'm telling you, it's not wise. It's not helpful. There is a better way, even though it might seem unusual. I want to read this verse. It might seem, out of the blue, but it fits clearly. It's Colossians 3, verse 13. It says, make allowance for each other's faults and forgive one another forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. There's a certain level of arrogance at play when we are unwilling to consider forgiving someone else. Because if we can't even consider to forgive someone else, it's as if we've forgotten that we're imperfect. We're broken. There's not a single one of us today who's going to go through this week perfect. And yet God loved us so much, he gave up his son for us. So I actually think kind of what's underlying, what's at play when we refuse to even consider forgiving someone is we've forgotten that every day we need to be forgiven by our God and the other people we wrong. So how arrogant of us to think that we should not consider to forgive someone. Does it mean it's always easy? Absolutely not. Does it mean that if someone has put you in harm's way or hurt you, that you owe them something? No, not at all. But forgiveness is about you in a lot. It's about you letting go of your right to claim revenge, because that is a burden you are not meant to carry. I'll get into this. I'll just save this because this is actually what I'm ending. So I'm going to move on. If you are unsuccessful, take one or two others and go back. So you go to someone privately, say, hey man, it really kind of upset me when you did this. And they're like, I don't care, or I don't know what you're talking about. You step away from that conversation, you think, no, this really hurts me. Like I want to make this work with them, but like they didn't hear me. What Jesus is saying is having a couple people who can kind of witness this and help bring some truth and respect to the conversation. That can be helpful. Here's what I think a lot of people do. They exaggerate what the other person did so that they sound even worse as you tell even more people about it. Here's what I mean. I'm so guilty of this. Go home from a stressful day and I start talking to Lacey about something. And I'm telling her like why I'm so stressed out or why I'm so upset. And her facial expression shows me she doesn't think it's that big of a deal. And it's like there's this thing in me subconsciously, like on the fly, I can read her facial expression and I start exaggerating the details of the story because I want her to see how wronged I was or how valid my feelings are. I'm not even aware I'm doing it half the time. But when we're afraid someone's not going to get to see our side of it, we are tempted to not use the truth. It's not helpful. It's not constructive. It's not going to get you what you need. And then the other thing that I think can be unwise sometimes is we involve other people, but we involve other people in a way that we know is not going to be constructive. Paige and Shaylee, come up. I need helpers of sorts. This will be quick and painless. I promise you don't have to do anything that's going to be tricky. But let's just say that Paige has wronged me. She ran over my foot with her car. And I'm angry about it because I have a broken foot. And I go to her and I'm like, Paige, hey, I know you probably didn't mean to, but you broke my foot. It's not a big deal. And she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't even drive. And I'm like, yeah, I got the video. And you're like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And I go, well, Shaylee hates Paige because 6 months ago, Paige ran over Shaylee's foot. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get Shaylee, and we're going to go together and tell Paige how dumb she is. Ridiculous example, I know. But do you guys sort of see how tempting this can be in a more realistic way? Shaylee, take a seat. Paige, I'm not done with you yet. Maddie, come on up here real quick. No, you didn't run over her foot. This is good. So here, stand. So Maddie has never had her foot run over by anybody. And even though I think Paige is sort of a difficult person, I know that Maddie gets along with her really well, but Maddie also gets along with me, and Maddie's managed to sort of live at peace with both of us. Maddie is the kind of person who I might say, Maddie, I've got to have this really awkward, difficult conversation with Paige. I know she respects you. I know she'll at least take me seriously if you're there. Would you be willing to join me when I try to go talk about this with Paige? That is a far more helpful and constructive approach than just bringing in people who you know have your back and don't respect the other person. Would you thank Maddie and thank Paige, and Paige, don't run over anyone's foot with your car? Your sister did that once? On your foot? Are you kidding me? Your sister actually ran over your foot with a car? Have you forgiven her? Okay, good. Okay. All right. Let me just say this. I recognize that when you guys are in high school, there may be instances where it's so personal, it's so sensitive, it's not realistic to think that you're going to find a couple friends who are kind of mature enough to help sort of play peacemaker. And I get that. You may find that's not really a realistic step for you. That's fine. But I just want to show you what the Bible at least says. And then sort of last thing I want to point out. It says, if that person refuses to listen, take your case to the church. The idea here is that if two people are both followers of Jesus, they're part of the family of God together. And that's why this is worth fighting through. It's not random or arbitrary. But God wants his people to live at peace with one another. And so what this is saying is if you're really getting stuck, bring in some authority to really try one last time to make sense of this and to reconcile. And it's just ironic saying, take your case to the church, because here's actually what I think happens more often. If that person refuses to listen, you stop coming to church so you don't have to see one another. Gosh, that's a bummer when that happens, and I know it happens all the time. Because I don't share this stuff because I think it's easy, and I don't share it expecting that every time you try to do this, it's going to go well. But I want you to know what the Bible says. And I want you to consider that maybe Jesus' way is better than the way that's typical and normal for most people your age. Not necessarily easier, not necessarily less awkward, but I really do think the teachings of Jesus on this topic can lead to some really helpful and productive and good results in your life. Now, Jesus' words here are really specifically aimed at when two people who are both Christians and part of the same community have conflict. But I think you can draw out some principles that could help you in any kind of conflict. And so I just want to quickly run down. If you sort of just take like the heart of what Jesus is saying here, here's the sort of 4 things he's pointing out. First, try to go individually. And if that doesn't work, take a small group of people you trust. And if that still doesn't work, bring in a trusted adult or authority figure. And then if that doesn't get you anywhere, set up healthy boundaries. This is what I started to get into a few minutes ago, and I said, no, I'll come back to that later. Guys, it's okay to pursue reconciling with someone. And if you find you're stuck and there's no way you can get on the same page, to set up some healthy ways to keep your distance. If someone has hurt you and you don't think you can feel safe living at peace with them, it's okay to set up boundaries. You don't owe it to someone to be their best friend again or to get back in that relationship just because you try to forgive them. Many of you will have situations while you're in high school and certainly beyond high school where the best and healthiest thing you can do for yourself and that other person is to establish some boundaries and keep distance. But when possible, we want to try to go through these steps in this process because most of the time it really can and will lead to some good stuff. So I invite Brantley and the band to come back up now. And we're going to end with a time of worship. But as they're like kind of plugging in their instruments and getting set up, I just want to give us a minute or two of quiet and sitting here. Because I know sometimes I get up here, or someone else could get up here, and we say a bunch of stuff, and we're kind of moving fast, and it's a lot to think about, and you agree with some of it, but you disagree with others, and you have some questions about this, and you'd really like to try this stuff, but then you get home and you got homework, and your parents are asking you a dozen questions, and you got to get up early, and it just goes so fast. I know that. So I just want to give you a minute or two to just be still. And just consider, is there someone you need to have a difficult conversation with? Some of you might feel ready to have a difficult conversation with someone, and that's awesome. Some of you might be in a situation where it's coming to mind that there might be someone, but you're not really quite sure how to do it. This is a little helpful, but it's still scary. And maybe you pull aside your small group leader before you get in the car tonight, or you talk with your parents, say, hey, I want to talk to so-and-so, but I'm not ready. We can work on this. I've said this so many times before, and this is always going to be the case. None of us are perfect. And this is a good place to work out our stuff we're trying to figure out. Had this night planned for weeks in advance. And as we've been looking up to this over the last 6 or 7 weeks, I've been so aware that this is not the most fun thing to talk about. And it's definitely not the most fun thing to apply or live out. But I also really believe that of all things we might talk about this school year, for some of you, this could be the single most helpful thing to start applying in some of your friendships and relationships with people. So I just want to give you a moment, just invite everybody to close your eyes. And just ask God to show you, is there something, is there someone? Is he trying to lead you in anything? And it's okay if not. You don't want to manipulate a situation. Maybe you just need to appreciate a minute of quiet. That's fine too. But just ask God, is there anything you're trying to lead me in right now? And then the band will lead us in a few songs, and then I'll come up and dismiss us at the end.